Hello everyone, and thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. So today I'll be talking about using Reddit for crowdsourcing for psychology research projects, but specifically a subreddit or subcommunity on Reddit called Sample Size. Not sure if everyone here is like a Redditor, but I assume people coming into this are familiar with some of the social media platforms, so I'll assume as much. So what I'll be getting into today for the structure of what's going on. First off, I'll talk about what sample size is exactly and some of the best practices that I learned on how to collect data from it, also based on a lot of the mistakes that I made personally. Second would be determining not only what sample size is, but whether or not it's actually a viable source of data for research. And the study that I did was comparing the data from sample size to MTurk, which is a big topic in this conference, of course. And the third thing I'll talk about are some current issues and limitations that impact using sample size if you're using it for research. So just before I start, all the references and links can be found on this link here, mainly because I know it's hard to cram in a bunch of references and slides and such. And if you put it at the end, then you can't you have to wait till the end to find any of the papers. Also, if you have any specific questions, you can look at the slide numbers and that might help with any specific issues you might have. So first off, I wanted to talk about how I even got into this in the first place. It was basically when I was still a plucky undergrad and I wanted to really dig into research. But basically, I didn't have any money and I didn't have any access to the undergrad pool, which is what you usually use at universities to do research projects. And the way that I came across sample size was basically because I was and pretty much can be considered a Redditor. I'm much more of a lurker than anything, so I don't really post much. But that's how I found out about sample size initially. And part of the motivation behind why I wanted to do research about sample size specifically, not only collect data on it, but also determine whether or not it's good or not, is as a kind of proof of concept for other people like me, like other undergrads that might find it useful. So to start, let's talk about what sample size is exactly. So sample size is a sub-community within Reddit. They're called subreddits, and it's composed of over 171,000 volunteers. The number's probably bigger now. It grows every day, basically. And the idea behind this community, I think it's a nice name for it, a very fitting name, is that people who are part of this community just volunteer to do research surveys. So people can just post on this community links to their research projects. It could be for school. It could be just a casual thing, like what's your favorite color sort of thing. But the idea is that people are volunteering to do these surveys or do research. Here, there is no compensation, a formal compensation structure. It's literally just links. And so compensation here is optional and it can be flexible. So if you want to offer, for example, gift cards through a raffle or something, that's very typical. That's possible here. One of the key qualities of sample size is that, and like many other Reddit communities, is that it's moderated. So it's not just people spamming links continuously, or you have no idea whether these links are even active or not. There's an active moderation team that makes sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to post their studies on sample size. And in my experience, and from what I've seen, it seems like an ideal kind of platform if you have any short surveys, simple experiments, or what I use it for, my class projects or course projects to collect data. So I assume everyone is familiar with how to sign up on it on Reddit, or if you already have a Reddit account, this is what sample size looks like. So you can see, for example, this post here has a little tag target showing us a marketing survey. This one is like a casual thing, the color thing, right? And then this one is an academic one, meaning it's for class or for academic research. And the procedure is that you make a Reddit account. That's probably the first prerequisite to just posting on this community. You make a study post on this community itself, and then you repost it or repeat this process every 24 hours as needed. And you can see here that sample size has specific rules on what we can do, and these are enforced by the moderators. So what that looks like, if you're not familiar, like if you're like a lurker like me, but you don't post as much, it's very simple. The idea is if you want to make a post on sample size or Reddit in general, the idea here is that you can just have your title and then add a text. For example, if it's a recruitment survey or a script, you can add the text into the text box and then provide the link to your survey. If you're providing just a link, as in you can just click it and then it'll direct the people to the survey, then you can just have the title and then embed the link directly, and then it's a clickable link. Pretty simple, and hopefully very familiar for those who use Reddit regularly. So this is what I can kind of break down what a kind of post on sample size looks like exactly. This is the one that I actually used for my very first research study and first study on sample size. The breakdown is that here you have to have a tag designating what the purpose of this survey is. In my case, it was academic because it's for a course project, or hopefully in the future, like academic research, like publication. There's the actual study title itself and the intended demographic that you're targeting, so that people who are interested in the survey or who are considering clicking it or participating know what kind of people you're looking for in the survey. And then, of course, you'll have the study link if you choose to embed it as such. This is an example of like a repost, which is essentially the exact same thing, but you also add a little tag in brackets that says it's a repost. Pretty straightforward. So this is an example of the second study that I did on sample size, where instead of using a clickable link, you have a description or a recruitment script that describes like a very typical like student project, describing the study and providing the link and the information in a post. Basically the same thing, but just in post form. So that's the idea of like how sample size works and what it is. And these are some of the things I can share about like how what I discovered would be best practices and how I basically messed up in multiple ways. So the first thing is that it may seem straightforward, but you have to follow these rules closely that they have. The moderation team is active, and Reddit itself also has like a spamming algorithms and such. Specifically, they have a 24-hour rule where you're only able to repost your link on the study for this community every 24 hours. That's to provide everyone an equal opportunity to like post their studies and recruit participants. And the thing is, in my experience, I thought I was doing the 24-hour thing, but I was off by like 10 or 20 minutes. And this kind of delay or this issue with like the timing accumulated such that it might be like 23 hours or like 23 hours and 50 minutes. But this isn't something that they're blind to. They can, like every post, you can check the history of the timing and such. And so I actually got suspended for 3 days, I believe, on my account. I don't know if it was the moderators or the Reddit like website itself or both, but I made a mistake in how I was posting it just because I wasn't paying careful attention to the 24-hour rule. And even though it may seem trivial of like 23 hours or something, it is something that they pay attention to, and it can have repercussions. And from what I found when I was recruiting, that daytime posting Eastern time, it's what works well. This is also discussed in more general by Schatz 2016. You can find that in the reference list. The second thing is that in general, you want to be posting studies that are short and simple. So less than 20 minutes. I believe I even received a comment on one of my studies saying, oh my goodness, why is this study so long? It's like 20 minutes to fill out why do I use this platform? What is this? So it's evident that these are volunteers, of course, ultimately, and you don't want to have like bombard them with giant surveys that are like, everyone knows the classic, like clumping 10,000 questions together and your eyeballs just roll over. You have no idea what you're doing at that point. I would also consider, as a courtesy to the participants on sample size, that you consider readability indices, like the ones you can find in Microsoft Word at the simplest, because as we'll see in the second part of this, there's a variety of education levels, and it's readability can matter in terms of the consent forms and materials, depending on the demographic that you're targeting. And one more thing is that you need to be responsive. So unlike mTurk or other crowdsourcing platforms, Reddit posts can be commented on by the users themselves. And this is not something you can exactly control on sample size. And it's not just a matter of like research methods or anything, but it's a matter of like practical, this link didn't work kind of thing. And I got that information actually very early on when I was posting one of my surveys, that there was some kind of technical issue with the link that we were posting. And because I was paying attention to this and not just absentmindedly posting and then just going on with my day, that we were able to resolve the issue and not have it have anything worse happen. So you have to be responsive and attentive to the posts that you make, because the users can actually give you, and often do give you, very valuable feedback on your surveys. So I've described some of the like practices I've learned based on my mistakes experiences. Some things I can tell you that are not going to be good for sample size are, first off, long studies. That was, again, an issue that was brought up by participants. You don't want to be bombarding volunteers here who are not participating for compensation with long surveys. The second thing is longitudinal studies. I feel that, or at least in the experience I've seen, it doesn't seem like trying to track participants on a transient participant pool makes much sense. Sample size is much more free in a way than other participant pools. And so I haven't done a longitudinal study, but I would expect really high attrition rates with longitudinal studies on sample size. It's hard, and you have to go through different ethical procedures to follow up with these sample size participants because study links are renewed and reposted all the time. And the third thing is complicated studies. So this is also an issue that can be shared by other platforms like MTurk, but we have to keep in mind the kinds of people who are the people and what the platforms are using when they're going on Reddit to just view posts and such. People might be on their phones, their tablets, they're not sitting at their computers all the time. They might be on like commuting and just reading things or want to answer a survey. And so if you have complicated behavioral tasks or things that require a lot of computational power in your study, probably not the best idea to put this on sample size when there's a high probability that it'll malfunction if they're on their phone or something, or if they're on the Reddit app. That was also feedback that I got, that surveys weren't working on the Reddit app itself. So we want to stay away from more complicated studies when you're using sample size. I also wanted to provide kind of like an FYI that even though I'm talking about sample size as a specific data collection community, there are other ways to collect data on Reddit. One will be discussed later, is like extracting data from the text from posts themselves. But there are also subreddits where you can also just post your survey if you have permission from the moderators in those specific communities. You can see Shatz 2016 for more information on that kind of general procedure. And this is an example of a subreddit that I frequent personally very frequently, where someone posted a graduate student survey with permission from the grad school subreddit community. So now I'm going to talk about, okay, I gave you all this information about sample size and all these best practices and such, but is it actually a good participant pool? Is it actually useful for research? Previous research has shown, well, first off, there isn't much previous research that used sample size, or at least reported that they used sample size. But the existing studies that did report information reported more diverse ages, education, and fairly even gender representation in terms of males and females compared to like traditional lab samples. Previous psychology findings have also replicated, and when they measure scale reliabilities, like psychometrically using Chromax alpha, they found that it was similar or comparable to their undergraduate lab samples. So it looks pretty favorable. And so these form the foundation of the study that I conducted to determine some of the viabilities of sample size. And in our study, we compared sample size to MTurk by administering a questionnaire simultaneously that was identical in both pools, measuring demographics, some data quality metrics, and the psychological characteristics of sample size participants. You can find the title here and in the references list. And just because this is important because it was based on null hypothesis significance testing, the sensitivities of these analyses that we used were small to medium effects as per Cohen's like more standardized metrics, unless otherwise stated. So in terms of demographics, we found what they found before, fairly balanced male-female gender distribution, but with the caveat of low non-binary gender representation. Participants were predominantly white and from the USA. And in turn, they had much more diverse income ranges in education, particularly having high school or equivalent as a highest education level compared to what you might find obviously in a undergraduate like university sample, for example. And finally, in terms of ages, we found that they were predominantly younger ages, concentrated in the brackets between 18 to 24 and 25 to 34. So in terms of data quality, there were several things that we measured to try to determine it, so multiple approaches. First one was we measured socially desirable responding, which we found was actually higher in sample size than MTurk, slightly higher. We measured demand characteristics using a scale and their confidence in what they thought about the hypothesis. And we found here no evidence of any difference between sample size and MTurk. And in terms of participant naivety, which is something that has been discussed in detail about MTurk and other pools before, we found mixed results, but we would say that both of them have high levels of scale familiarity, although we will acknowledge that this is like an exploratory analysis. And other data quality metrics that are just summarized here, we had attention checks dispersed throughout the survey, and we found that slightly fewer were failed on average for the sample size participants than MTurk. Survey completion time, this was an exploratory thing that we wanted to analyze after the fact. MTurkers finished the survey 5 minutes faster than the sample size participants. And as we saw in the previous research, they measured the reliability of the psychological scales used in sample size. And here we found no evidence of differences or that sample size was actually more reliable psychometrically compared to MTurk and lab samples. This, the reliability analyses is one I'll note where the sensitivity was not the same as the other analyses, not small to medium, but it was less sensitive. So that's something to keep in mind for these analyses. And in terms of psychological characteristics, we found that participants were more intrinsically motivated to participate than MTurk. For example, they participate because it's interesting or to pass time, like this, or they want to help with research. And we found that MTurkers were much more motivated to make money than the sample size participants, which might be expected given the platform. We found that there were lower ratings of social and economic conservatism, which was, again, another exploratory analysis that we conducted after the fact. And in terms of other characteristics, we found no evidence of differences in altruism, but we found slightly higher need for cognition for sample size participants than MTurk workers. So these are some, the psychological characteristics are some things to keep in mind when you're collecting data from sample size, is that they actually do have differences compared to MTurk and likely general populations that need to be kept in mind for your specific research questions. So some caveats we also discovered here in this study is that data collection comparatively is much slower. So MTurk is known for having very fast data collection speeds, and sample size is much slower, taking almost, in this study at least, 1 month to collect data. The other thing is that although we have demographics here, you can't enforce any of them. Anyone can just click the links as they want to on sample size. And we had high attrition rates, I think around 193 or 194 participants, even though we had 277 completed. 193 or 194 started, but didn't even make it to debriefing. So there's high attrition rates, as we might expect as well with online research in general. So finally, I'll finish off with some current issues and limitations concerning sample size. So some of these issues here are actually been discussed in very large detail in this conference itself in earlier sessions. Specifically the non-naive participants and bots and random fraudulent responses. These are well known in the literature and have been discussed in this conference. So I won't focus on these as much. They do impact sample size similarly. The ones I want to focus on are the transient sample characteristics and ethical compensation issues. What I mean by transient sample characteristics is that just like in MTurk on sample size, surely the characteristics can depend on when data is collected, right? And I think a point needs to be emphasized that the research on MTurk and sample size is always ongoing, and we can't have one definitive study, even the study that I presented here, as anything saying that, oh, this is how sample size is and this is how it's defined. I think a couple thousand more people have already joined the community as of me making this presentation. And so we always have to keep updating our information about these pools. Sample size is no exception. And something that can help if you're considering using sample size is to actually report demographics and the data collection dates and times that you did your study. The second thing is ethical compensation. So we conducted both studies at the same time, with MTurk being compensated with money and sample size with a raffle. So you have to consider, even though sample size can be used to collect data without compensation, if you're doing things simultaneously where you're providing other participants compensation but not them, is this fair to the participants? And one question we've gotten before is that, what do we do with ethics review boards? It's okay. You have to be transparent with how you plan to do compensation with the ethics review boards, and they will make their own judgments and make their judgments about and ask for modifications. But in our case, we were totally fine with our approach. There shouldn't be any problems with using sample size. You just have to be transparent with the ethics review boards. And we wanted to note as well that only 50% of the people in sample size opted into the raffle that we offered in the first place. So these are all the issues that I wanted to discuss about sample size. I think overall it can be useful, but there are a lot of these aspects that we need to consider when we're using it. And the research is always ongoing for sample size. So there's no definitive study, and we have to keep using it and keep providing information about the pool. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation. I'll take any questions if there are any.
All right, yeah, thank you, Raymond. We have some time for a couple of questions, so people can drop questions into the chat, or if you'd like to just unmute your microphone and ask, we have some time for this.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. First, it was really impressive presentation, and I really enjoyed your topic. And thank you.
Thank you.
So my question is, sometimes, as you said during the presentation, the demographics of Reddit users is some is skewed, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
I'm wondering do you also use like this platform when you want to collect data for like general like Americans, or like just thoughts of like general population? Do you also use this Reddit group? That's my question.
So yeah, I would say that's definitely a limitation of like collecting data on Reddit in general. We have to definitely acknowledge that these certainly not a replacement for any like a proper like representative sample of like Americans, I don't think. Redditors themselves, I think there's research in general about Redditors that they have also have specific demographic characteristics that differ. I haven't compared any of these characteristics to like a representative like American sample, for example, but I would imagine that there are definitely like differences. I certainly would expect people who use this participant pool to acknowledge that, yeah, these are like, you know, Redditors, and they have to be careful with how they're, what they're trying to generalize with these.
Yeah.
Definitely don't think they're like a representative.
Yeah. So like, that's actually, you have a point, because like, I was wondering that like, if I use like this way, I should like confine my study as, oh, this is a reaction from like social media users, or to be specific, like Reddit users, or I can just like generalize this like in like more broader way. So, I mean, that's my question.
Yeah, I would be careful about trying to generalize. And yeah, part of it is also even having the demographic information in the first place. Right. A lot of people don't even get the information. So, but yeah, you definitely have to take care with how you're generalizing any of the results. Just like with any sample, I would say there's some improvements over like undergraduate psychology students at a university, for example, in terms of diversity and representativeness. But again, these are like Redditors, social media users. These are things we have to keep in mind. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question, kind of, I wasn't able to fully catch this when you were going through it, but it seemed like for the non-naivete results, you had some evidence. I think maybe you said that the Redditors weren't completely naive. I may have completely missed it, but if so, I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, how these people would have prior experience, how it is they came to Reddit. But again, I may have like completely missed how you characterize that.
Sure. Let me see if I'll, I can go back to the slide, I think, actually. Oops. Actually, I think it should be fine. Yeah. So the general point that I was making about the like non-naivety issue is that there are participants in sample size who have exposure to the questionnaires. The idea was that we would ask them, are you familiar with like these questionnaires that we just asked you about? And we had several, like the social desirability and such. And when I said mixed, and it was exploratory thing as well, but when I said mixed, I meant that in some questionnaires, like sample size participants, a larger proportion were familiar with the questionnaire than MTurk. And then others like MTurk would be, or vice versa. But for the most part, there was like non-trivial percentages of people who were familiar, or at least reported that they felt familiar with some of the questionnaires. And I would expect as much because they're completing surveys voluntarily, so.
Do you know how long has our sample size been around? Do you know?
I think since 2012. Yeah.
Okay, so quite a while. Okay.
Quite a while, yeah. Sorry, I hope I answered your question.
Oh yeah, no, I just was trying to think more about who these people are, why they would be familiar with these measures. But it's been around for a while, so it's possible that they've seen these things before, kind of like any other platform where people participate in lots of studies.
Yeah.
All right, well, if there are not any other questions, then we can move on to our second talk with both George and Emily from Drive Research. So yeah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, nice job, Raymond. Really interesting. Didn't even know that subreddit existed. It's something we'll definitely check out. So appreciate the time on that. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We're excited to share some more information on using social media to recruit participants for market research. I'm George Kuhn, owner and president of Drive Research. I also have our awesome marketing manager here, Emily Carroll, who is going to help us walk through this presentation and take some of the next steps.
All right, thank you, George. So today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about how we can use and how Drive Research leverages paid Facebook ads to find both survey responses and qualitative market research projects. So these are a little bit about the topics we'll cover today, both just the benefits of Facebook advertising, what it is, what it isn't. We'll share kind of like a case study or an example post of what we do on Facebook to encourage market research participation, when it works best, when it doesn't really work out, and then some uncontrollable circumstances of Facebook advertising. So first and foremost, the benefits. So using social media to find research participants is definitely not the first sampling method I think most research firms think to utilize. But from our experience, I will say there's definitely certain instances where using paid Facebook ads to find these participants is a lot better than a panel vendor. So these are kind of the benefits where we see Facebook a better fit than a panel. First and foremost, it's a lot greater reach. So we find sometimes the issue with using generic online panel firms is that they're limited to who they can collect feedback from. We find that many people sign up for several online panels because they're promised, incentives every time they take a survey. So they want to sign up for as many panels as possible to get as many incentives as possible. Whereas Facebook, you're really not recruited to that same audience. We shared some statistics here that as of July 2021, Facebook has 2 million active users. And there's another stat that there's 6 new profiles being created every second. So you're kind of always replenishing that reach of who you can kind of target for market research. And more aside from just the greater reach is that it's who you're targeting on Facebook. So, real life consumers. And by that, we mean that members of an online panel have taken plenty of screening surveys to kind of understand what answers qualify or disqualify them from being selected from a paid study. But with Facebook, recruiters are able to advertise to not only a larger audience, but to people who are not necessarily privy as to what answers would lead them to be chosen for a study. So we find that it helps us and it helps our clients kind of find that exact audience that they're hoping to target, but also gaining those truthful, honest answers. When you're using a panel, for example, you'd have to ask something like, are you a fan of the NBA? And people who are these professional survey takers kind of know, okay, yeah, sure, I'm a fan of the NBA, even though I'm not, just to qualify for that study. Whereas people on Facebook have no idea why we're even asking that. So they'll be honest with what their answer is. And you can even target NBA interest related pages and things like that to make sure you're really targeting the right audience. And then also a really good benefit is that we find that we get better open ends, especially when using this for a survey. So again, this kind of brings us back to the last point of panel respondents give shorter answers because they're trying to complete as many surveys as possible. Where again, Facebook respondents kind of go into a lot greater detail and they provide a lot more engaged responses because there's just that lack of knowledge around gaming the system to qualify. And, putting it, kind of thinking in their shoes, if they're scanning through Facebook, they're probably sitting on their couch, getting ready to go to bed. They see this ad, and they're like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of interested in this. I'll click into it and take a survey. So they're interested, they've signed up to give you that feedback, whereas panel respondents are kind of really, or panel respondents are really just in it for that incentive. So next, when we say that we're leveraging social media for, market research, what necessarily is that? It's not organically posting something to your brand's Facebook page. If that were the case, you'd be promoting the upcoming research study to a really limited and general audience who have actively chosen to like or follow your Facebook page. And honestly, in most cases, this audience typically just includes more so like personal connections, with your coworkers, family, or friends, or maybe brand promoters that just want to see more so the culture side of your business. And as a result, if you're just advertising a research study to this audience, it's kind of just a group of more like-minded people, and you're really less control of the kind of people who are trying to take that screener survey or taking the survey itself. So that's why we find a lot more success and control over paid Facebook ads. So how we use it, it's targeted paid Facebook ads to reach your ideal participant based on whatever your qualifying criteria is, whether it's a certain age group, whether it's male or females. If you just want to target a county in New York State, they have really good interest targeting. The list really goes on and on with the possibilities of who you can target with paid Facebook ads. So for the purpose of this presentation, we'll definitely be focusing largely just on paid Facebook ads. I'll say we've tried things with LinkedIn, and there was a time when it worked really great. You could imagine it'd be a good location for, the B2B audiences. So when LinkedIn advertising hadn't really taken off, we were able to see good success from it. But now people are just more familiar with getting those, sponsored. I'm sure all of you get them at least once a week, those sponsored in-mail messaging. So people are used to kind of ignoring them or just not taking them seriously. Whereas we just find that there's more kind of engagement with paid Facebook ads. All right, so here is an example of a qualitative recruitment ad that we ran on behalf of a well-known soda brand. I'd say it's perhaps to date our most successful qualitative recruiting campaign on Facebook. So to give a little bit of background, the client came to us because they couldn't find enough participants from a panel in their specific markets. So they were targeting people in both Dayton, Ohio and Fort Wayne, Indiana. And the study itself required a lot of tasks. So it asked that participants download an app, visit a store, upload a receipt of the soda, take pictures and take videos of kind of their experience in purchasing the soda. And then lastly, the participant had to complete a follow-up survey 6 weeks after purchasing the soda. So very complex study, using that kind of in-depth type of study, plus adding on the fact that the markets were smaller, made it really big challenge for people to find them on a panel. So they came to us and we utilized our just knowledge behind Facebook advertising for market research. And we were able to find them the audience that they were looking for. So, here we say 50 soda drinkers, but it was also varying other kind of qualifying criteria, such as, product usage or brand awareness, but just generalized, we'll say soda drinkers. So we were able to target, of course, people in Dayton, Ohio and people in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They saw this ad that, here's the example of it. This is something that kind of scrolled on their Facebook. They clicked this link and they had to take a screener survey. So that allowed us to kind of ask pre-screening questions to learn if they'd even be qualified enough for the study. And from there, schedule them if we deemed that they were qualified. So as a result of this Facebook ad, we were able to pre-screen 182 qualified participants in Dayton and 157 qualified participants in Fort Wayne. And that resulted in a 92% completion rate for the 6-week study. So 92 people of the 100 people recruited were successful in completing that, all of those kind of steps that I had mentioned before. And lastly, a great price point too. I think this was even like half of the budget that we had predicted. So a total spend of $1,200 for 92 product testers as a result of a simple Facebook ad. So when does Facebook ads work best for market research? First and foremost, we definitely find that recruitment to paid studies work really well. It does work in gaining, survey responses, but we find better success because people are kind of guaranteed that paid incentive. If we say sign up for an online focus group and you'll gain, $75 or whatever the incentive is, people are a lot more interested in that aside from, take a survey and we're raffling off a $100 gift card. They're more interested in that guaranteed incentive. Next, shorter screener surveys or just shorter surveys in general kind of goes back to the point Raymond was making about Reddit users. So we find that long surveys that take 5, 10+ minutes just don't really work well on Facebook. People definitely tend to drop off and kind of exit the survey and just go back to scrolling on Facebook. if you want to compare the two audiences of a Facebook user and a panel user, people on panel sign up to take surveys. So they'll kind of go through a 10-minute survey if that means that they're going to get an incentive, whereas people are not on Facebook to take a survey. So they are easily get disengaged and easily kind of want to just go back to the reason that they were on Facebook, which is just to scroll and look at people's news feeds, not necessarily take a survey. So you have to make sure the survey is quick and really engaging. Next, the placement of the Facebook ad. So on Facebook, they give you a whole array of options as to where you want to display your ads. That could be on the news feed, it could be on Facebook Marketplace. You even have the option to advertise on Instagram, being that Facebook owns Instagram. So we've kind of toyed and played with all of these different locations, and we've found that the Facebook newsfeed is the best place where people are most likely going to see and interact with an ad. Testing a new product. So kind of similar to the case study that I just shared in the previous slide, people love testing new product concepts. So think, in-home usage tests or focus groups, or, things where people feel like they are in the groundbreaking of a new product, whether it's a soda or it's just a new attraction coming to someone's community. Like they just love being in the ground running of providing that opinion. So that definitely is always of interest for Facebook users. And then lastly, low incident rate studies. So I'm going to actually hand this off to George. He'll probably do a better job at explaining that than I will.
Yeah, two quick examples here. One study we ran, we were looking for parents of children for a PBS study, children with 5-year-olds. And if you think about the incidence rate of that and targeting that with a general population in a place like Oklahoma City or Tucson, Arizona, or Anchorage, Alaska, you're going to rip through a lot of sample to try to find a parent of a 5-year-old. Facebook kind of scarily knows a lot about you based on your behavior and your profiles. So they actually have an interest bucket where we can go into Facebook and say, just show this recruitment ad to parents with children who are have children aged 5 to 7. So all of our spend and all of our budget is being contributed to a really low IR audience, and we're not showing it to general public. The other example I'll give is we were doing focus groups for a brand of cell phone. We were recruiting participants in Philadelphia and Chicago. The client for the groups were looking for someone who recently switched from an Android device to an iPhone, or an iPhone to an Android device in the last 30 days. We're all loyalists to one or the other. It's a very dichotomous thing. So to try to find someone who switched in the last 30 days, the IR of that and the incidence rate is beyond, lower than 1% for sure. Again, Facebook knows a lot. They know how you access your Facebook account and what browser you're using and what device. That's all interest targeting. So what we're able to do is go into Facebook and say, just show me this ad of people who have accessed their device or their Facebook account through both an iOS operating system and an Android operating system in the past 30 days. Outside of the people who maybe have an Android tablet at home but use an iPhone, it helps us kind of narrow that audience. Again, it's not something that you can just send a general email invite out and try to get people to come back. It really helps us hone our spend and make sure we're hitting on the right targets with a lot of the interest buckets they offer.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so when does Facebook advertising not necessarily a good fit for market research? Small geographies. So when you're kind of getting into single zip codes, that's where it tends to just be too small of a reach for Facebook. The zip code itself could be a large population, but it's just going to target people who are kind of active Facebook users. And you're just going to cycle through the same audience who, if they saw your ad once or twice and didn't choose to click on it, they're probably not going to click on it again. So I think the smallest we like to go is probably county, but I think single zip code wise, it gets a little bit tricky. So kind of what George was saying, Facebook has a lot of information on us. They even used to have a lot more. In about 2010s, the personal data belonging to millions of Facebook users were collected without anyone's consent by a British consulting firm called Cambridge Analytica. Not sure, who's familiar with that whole lawsuit, but finally in 2018, it came to light that they were collecting all this data on Facebook users without us knowing. And they were forced to strip a lot of that third-party data. So, good for, a Facebook user, but in the terms of market research, it stripped our capabilities of targeting anything by, specific ethnicities or targeting anything by household income. There's kind of ways around it. The example I sometimes use is that there's not a bucket that you can target, household incomes of 50,000 or household incomes of 100,000, but there's interest buckets around SNAP or WIC or things like that you can kind of try to do interest targeting around, low households or low income households, but it's not guaranteed as well it is as you're checking off like a gender box. Political or sensitive topics. So as you can imagine, if you've ever kind of seen the funny things like Facebook trolls, they're very confident and they will say whatever they want on your ads. So if it gets into politics or any sensitive topics, they'll have no problem kind of saying really, really harsh language on the ad. You cannot turn off comments. You can hide comments and you can kind of moderate them, but it turns into probably more work than it's worth. So we try to steer away from those overly political topics. This is an interesting one. So any people or brands that are new to Facebook advertising, Facebook puts a spend cap on new advertisers to kind of make sure that you are following the rules, you're not spamming people, you are able to pay the budget that you put into Facebook. So I believe they cap it at $50 a day for new advertisers. And eventually that cap gets eliminated, but there's no hard and fast rule as to when they'll take that spend cap off. So sometimes it's tough if you really need sample really quickly. That $50 a day is just not going to do it. Your spending obviously varies based off of who exactly you're looking for, but it is sometimes a challenge for new Facebook advertisers. So oftentimes that's why for our clients, we will just run them on the Drive Research Facebook advertising account. And then lastly, routing respondents to a different brand's landing page. Facebook has a lot of rules as to what they'll approve and what they'll disapprove of an ad, and they actually have a manual review process. So one of those things that they look for is if you are, say Drive Research has a Facebook ad and we are sending respondents to a different landing page. So, someone's hosting their survey on their own domain. They will not allow that. It needs to be, if Drive Research is advertising, it needs to be that same landing page where we are sending them to a Drive Research domain or URL. It's just kind of one of those small things that Facebook looks for. It's definitely new in the world of market research. I don't think many people are doing it. So we have to kind of stay within the confines of their rules for other people. Lastly, I just wanted to talk through some uncontrollable circumstances with Facebook ads. Again, you're kind of in their own world and you kind of have to play to their rules and just the different scenarios of Facebook advertising. So for example, you're also competing with other advertisers. So we had an instance where we were trying to target a specific county and we needed both males and females, and we were really struggling to get male survey responses. We were putting so much money every day on it, and it was not moving the needle for male responses. And then one night we just came back and the ad had blown up and we had gotten so many male responses. So what that kind of tells us is that there was another advertiser who was kind of targeting that same audience as us. And there's only so much space that Facebook will allow in their newsfeed to be for ads. So they could have been spending more than us. The ad could have just resonated more with that audience and they were getting that display space over us. And then their campaign ended and it was our turn to kind of attract that audience. So things that, you're not really in control of there. Again, just the Facebook ad review process, like I was saying earlier, market research is definitely new to them. So we've even found where we'll do the same exact ad in, let's say, Chicago, and then we'll have that same exact ad in New York City, and it'll get approved in New York City, but it won't get approved in Chicago for, you know, a random reason. It's whoever is reviewing your ad that day and how generous they're feeling. But for the most part, we kind of know what they'll approve and what they won't approve. So we have it kind of down to a science. And then lastly, just again, the like little stipulations of what you can and can't include in the ad. You're not allowed to say things like, we're looking for females with blue eyes who are right-handed, you know, whatever your criteria is. In Facebook's eyes, we understand as market research why people do that and what you're looking for. You know, you have quotas, but in the eyes of Facebook, they're seeing that as you are just being biased towards one type of person, and you know, are being, they want you to be inclusive of all types of people. So if you kind of outwardly say that you're looking for a certain type of person with certain characteristics, they're going to kind of flag that. And lastly, sometimes they'll allow you to say if there's like an incentive attached to the market research study. Sometimes they allow it, sometimes they don't. Again, it's based off who's approving it, but they basically don't want it to come off as that you are spamming people or scamming people to collect their information in return for, you know, a fake promotion. So they don't want you to, even if you're not doing that, sometimes it comes off as, oh, we are collecting your name and your email and your interests. And we're going to pretend that we're going to give you money, but we're not really going to do that. In the eyes of Facebook, they think that's the case, but we know it's not. So just being cognizant of that language. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. We do have a featured resource on our blog called The Ultimate Guide, How to Use Social Media to Find Research Participants. It's a very in-depth ultimate guide that really goes into kind of all of these things that we discussed here today, but in a lot more detail. It's something that we love to do. We blog Monday through Friday. We're always publishing new content. So definitely check that out. Definitely can open the floor to any questions if you have time.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I've been wanting to better understand what people do with Facebook for a while. So I think we do have just maybe 1 minute for a question, and there's one in the chat. So maybe we can quickly answer that and then make sure we leave time for the next talk. So the question I think is about, you said something about people who might see your ad but haven't clicked on it after a couple of times. I think the question was about varying the ads, like having different images, maybe different messages, if that would help.
Yeah, so that's a really good
matter
example.
Much.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Facebook has analytics, and one of those are like frequency. So if your frequency is starting to get above like 3, 4, 5, that's pretty much when you're going to want to replace your image. So change whatever that ad image is, update the copy. Those are probably the two easiest things to update, and that will kind of refresh Facebook's ad frequency and kind of get you back in people's newsfeeds.
Okay, so thank you again for your presentation. We'll move on to Sung, who's going to be talking about comments on online news articles.
So yeah, first, I'm so glad that I can present my research today. Thank you, CloudResearch. And allow me to introduce myself briefly. Actually, it's related to my background is related to the motivation of my research project. So I'm Seung-Woo Choi, a PhD student in the media school at Indiana University, Bloomington. And before the current PhD program, I used to work as a TV producer in South Korea. So my last job is a TV producer in the entertainment program production team in KBS, which is the largest broadcaster in South Korea, producing a lot of K content. And another thing I should say is that this research is funded by the Kern Scholarship in Indiana University. So I'd like to say thank you to the donors. So as of now, the study has finished the pilot one. So I can say that any feedback from any of you could literally make this project better. So, okay, let's get started. The title of this presentation is Representativeness of Comments under Online News, and the subtitle shows a broad research question of the study. So, how well do the commenters represent the whole audience group? And as I said, the reason that I talked about my industry background is because it's related to the motivation of this project. So I used to produce a program introducing Korean culture, including food to foreign cast, as you see these photos. Once my production team have the foreign cast eat this Korean food, tteokbokki. As you might guess, this is a quite spicy dish and sometimes used as a food to surprise foreigners in Korean TV news by the taste. After the broadcast, I checked out online comments about the episode, about the clip. And there were two groups of commenters on YouTube. So one group said it was a blast watching their reaction. Conversely, another group said that it was an awful cliche and more like torturing their tongues. So these are all like comments under clips of my television program. And they even debated on the comment threads. And at the point, I was wondering which side represented the whole audience group's opinion better beyond the commenter group. And if the issue is not about a spicy food, but more important topics, including political or social issues covered by journalists, the importance of comments must be higher. And in fact, these comments are news resources for journalists in the digital era. You know, before the digital era, it was not easy for journalists to get a lot of direct feedback from their audience. And now journalists can even communicate with the audience through comment threads, given that one of the main motivations journalists to do their jobs is to change the society in the right direction, they believe. So monitoring the comments under their news is a natural thing to journalists and also a necessary thing. But while comments under online news look helpful resources for journalists, we do not know how to cook and use the material in an objective way yet. So the current project believes that the first step to approach the solution is to see how well comments represent the whole audience's ideas, as I experienced with the tteokbokki. So particularly this project addresses how the representativeness varies by political orientation of news outlets. Like the commenters who write comments under Fox News could represent the whole audience group of the news better than the commenters of MSNBC do, as an example. So to test these research questions, a new type of approach was brought here. First, real comments under online news were collected. Then online surveys were conducted to collect comments about exactly the same news from random audience representing the whole audience group. So after data collection, those two text sets were compared using NLP, natural language processing. Their similarity were compared. So to be specific, I followed this procedure. First, I selected one single news topic for all of the news reports used in this study. Then selected news reports about the topic from 3 different news outlets having different political orientation: conservative, neutral, liberal. Third, I collected real comments under each of the news reports, news videos. And then to collect texts assumably representing the whole audience, conducted an online survey on Mturk asking participants to write one comment after watching one of the 3 news reports according to their political orientation. Lastly, I analyzed the similarities between the 2 sets of text by Python, a computational language. So First, about the news topic, I decided to choose a single one, as I said, for news reports from different news outlets, because if the news content is not the same, we could not guess whether the difference across the news reports originated from their political orientation or from the content itself. So I choose this topic, amend the government's poem read at President Biden's inauguration. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that exactly the same footage was broadcasted by multiple broadcasters. Actually, this is also the reason that I chose news videos, not news articles for this study. And another main reason is that I want to choose political, but not really political news. So I know this sounds nebulous. What I mean is, although the poem reading happened at a very political place, it is true that the audience's interpretation and reaction could be pretty diverse beyond the political context. So for example, this is one of the top comments about this news. So we can see a non-political context as well. And the benefit of this is that we further see political sensitivity by different political groups. So 3 news videos about this poem read were drawn from 3 broadcasters, each of which represent different political orientations. For conservative, Fox was selected, neutral, C-SPAN. For liberal, MSNBC was selected. I know some of you could have different suggestions for this, like if you have, like, please share them in the Q&A time. And the easiest way to collect the news reports from the 3 broadcasters are visiting their own websites. But I thought that that's not a good idea, actually, because user interface and user experiences by their websites could influence the comments. So I think it might be better to collect their news from one single social media platform, and the alternative is YouTube. So this is one of the news videos on YouTube uploaded by C-SPAN. And this table compared the 3 videos on YouTube. You can see that the video lengths are pretty similar. About number of views, you know, the Fox audience might not really like any of Biden's inauguration videos. So there is a huge gap between Fox and MSNBC, actually. Also regarding likes versus dislikes, MSNBC and C-SPAN have more likes, whereas Fox has more dislikes. So the most important thing is number of comments, which we used as data. Again, here is a substantial gap across the broadcasters. It is a fact that this could be an intrinsic limitation of this study, since NLP comparison should be better with more text. So yeah, the imbalance of the number of comments across the 3 might take the imbalance of accuracy of similarity score in some ways. Let's move to another set of comments from online survey written by random audience. First, I recruited 300 participants via Amazon MTurk, actually through CloudResearch. Thanks, CloudResearch. And to be specific, I conducted the survey 3 times, and in each turn, I recruited 100 participants within one single political group. So 100 participants for each of conservative, neutral, liberal. And there is a functionality I can designate the participants' political orientation on CloudResearch. But the problem is when I asked their political orientation again in the survey. So like I asked, I identified their political orientation again in my own survey, and they said that like I'm joining as a conservative, but actually I'm like politically neutral. So the final numbers of commenters excluding invalid answers are conservative 96, neutral 85, liberal 102, so a little bit unbalanced. And they were assigned one of the 3 YouTube clips according to their political orientation. Like liberal watched the MSNBC clip, then each of them wrote 1 comment. I did that simply because of external validity. I do not want to collect comments from participants who have not and will never watch a video from the news outlet. So although this survey collected comments from random audience to represent the whole audience group, the randomization is conducted within the possible audience group, not just real random people, to keep the external validity. So about NLP analysis, I think I should unavoidably skip a number of parts, as most of them are beyond our common interest. However, I'd like to share the most important two things. So first, the index I used here is for similarity score is Cosine Similarity, which measures the angle of the two text sets in a vector space after vectorizing the text. So, and so mathematically, the range could be from -1 to +1, but normally for text analysis, the range is from 0 to 1. And 0 means there's nothing similar between the two texts. Conversely, 1 means the two texts are the same. One important advantage of cosine similarity over other tools is which measure magnitude, which is free from size difference between the texts. And it is beneficial for the text set in this study, as we said. So this index cosine similarity was calculated using BERT, BERT. This is a neural network-based language model for NLP pre-training developed by Google. And it is known as one of the state-of-the-art model in terms of its accuracy. Because the model helps computers to understand the context of human language. For example, about the word running, the model can distinguish the meanings of running between he is running a company and he is running a marathon, running in a marathon. So yeah, BERT is innovative. Now let's talk about the results. So you know that we have these 6 subgroups to compare, right? 3 in the real comment groups and 3 in the survey comment group. By the way, the number of real comments here, 2053, is after excluding replies in the comment threads. I will talk about this later more. And okay, and before we compare each political group between real comments and survey group comments, it is helpful to define neutral people's characteristics. It must be true that the word neutral is sometimes ambiguous, right? So, and the result on real comments show that neutral comments are more similar to liberal ones than conservative ones. And the result on the survey comments showed a similar result. So while the gap between those two similarity scores are smaller, still neutral comments are more similar to liberal ones in survey comments. And now let's see the similarity scores by political group. So liberal comments are the most similar, and then neutral comments, and lastly conservative comments. So in other words, the result of my pilot study says that the more liberal the news outlet is, the better the commenters represent the whole audience group. But why is it? There could be multiple scenarios to explain this. And here I'm bringing 2 scenarios. I exclude the neutral here, sorry, to deliver ideas simply. So first scenario, the spectrum of the conservative is wider than the liberal. So it could have like higher standard deviation. So if that's the case, the smaller similarity score of the conservative group could be natural. Another scenario is different from the previous one, assuming that the spectrum of those groups are similar. However, given their centers, the position of the majority of the commenter groups could be different. Say the shape of the whole audience group might be more like a bell curve, and if the commenter group is skewed to one side as the conservative commenter group on this page, assumably, it is probable that the similarity score is low. But these are just scenarios from just a pilot one. And in the main study, I will do these analysis further. I'm planning to do that. And through the online survey, I gauged that there is a like multiple possible demographic moderators. Like age, gender, race, also frequency of consuming online news and visiting YouTube will be, so they will be tested in the main study. Meanwhile, topic differences and political sensitiveness by political group will be explored using NLP topic modeling techniques such as LDA. However, still there are a couple of hurdles, and to be honest, I have not found how to get over them yet. So the first one is replies. As I said, replies are necessary to be distinguished from direct comments, right? And the result used was calculated in that way, the result you already saw. However, I found that the sample sizes for some groups become very small after excluding them. The real comments under the Fox News became just around 100. And another hurdle is emojis. While YouTube comment threads allow people to write emojis on the online survey, emojis are not very possible to use. But nowadays emojis really mean something. So like there are multiple comments only with emojis. So I think I should think more about this, because emojis are, I think it's a kind of like new venue that I and other researchers on online comments should explore. Yeah, that's it. That's the end of my presentation. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple more minutes here. If anyone has any questions, again, you can post those in the chat or unmute yourself and just ask.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, so how did you determine the political orientation of the the MTurk people that you recruited? Sorry if I missed a slide or something.
So I use the functionality on CloudResearch. So like there's a tab that I can choose that this, if I want to focus on conservative group this time, I only check I tick the conservative only, very conservative over slightly conservative. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it's too simple. Sorry. Yeah. But I should say that I recheck that through my survey. So first CloudResearch filtered, and then my research survey also filtered out somebody who said the wrong political orientation. So 2 steps. Yeah.
I have a quick question. So it's a very interesting study. But the question is there any specific reason why you chose to show different videos to MTurk participants? If you just cut the important section and then it could be qualitatively the same videos, right? So it could give you much better power for that analysis. Was there any specific reason for that one?
Yes. So what I did is that I displayed a Fox News video to people who said that whose political orientation is conservative, and I showed MSNBC's YouTube clip to participants who said that who are liberal, and I said that I thought that because the starting point and the ending point is slightly different across different videos, right? Because they got exactly the same footage, but the point they cut it for their broadcasting are different. So that's the reason why I showed the different videos. And also I thought that because when we see a clip from Fox, we can see that there's a sign that this is from Fox News, and there are some signs on the videos that about the news outlet, and I thought that it could be influential, and I tried to make those participants on MTurk and the real commenters on the same page to minimize the effect of like videos themselves.
Thank you. Yeah.